All right, everybody. Happy Community Manager Appreciation Day 2016. Our community of community managers have been celebrating for 7 years now, ever since Jeremiah Owang tweeted out, hey, every fourth Monday in January, we should celebrate community managers and call it Community Manager Appreciation Day. So following along, the hashtag is hashtag CMAD. We've been doing Hangouts with people all over the world for 4 years now. For the last 3, we've been doing 24-hour Hangouts, which is pretty intense, but a lot of fun. And speaking of 3 years, for the last 3 years, we've had sponsors come together and our community come together to form an awards program. And so people nominate each other, and we send out great swag and great awards to those who have been nominated and win from the committee. And this year we've had over 300 people nominated, so that was a record for us, we look forward to next year and continue to increase our community and those who are being recognized. My name is Brew, the Director of Awesome with BTC Revolutions and co-producer of My Community Manager, and really just happy to be here.
Hey everybody, I am Sherry Rohde and I'm the Community Manager at Magento and co-producing JR Hangout and my CMGR Hangout.
Hey guys, it's Barack. I am the founder of Amplify Your Biz, and I am also the community manager for Meshfire here in Seattle.
Hey guys, I am Dom. I am a community manager, project manager with BTC Revolutions, as well as co-host with Sherry and Brew for Community Manager Hangout, CMGR Hangout. You know, like Brew was talking about, we have some absolutely amazing sponsors that came together this year, so I just want to shout them out, because you know, this year they really upped their game and a lot of them came together. So big thanks to Meshfire, to Igloo Intranet, to Amplify Yourself, socialmedia.org, communitymanagement.org, Zoomf, Vanilla Forums, Sprout Social, Online Community Results, Higher Logic, and Salesforce Community Cloud. You guys are absolutely awesome, so thank you for all of your support to help do the awards. And in the words of DJ Khaled, we have another one, so another award to give away. And this one is a really awesome one. It's the, you know, they're all really awesome, but this one is pretty sweet. It's the Let's Take This Offline, the best at activating in-person events. And we had 5 finalists. They were Susan Tenby, Nikki Ficca, Leslie Likens, Asha Chandri, and Alex Shabar. And if we could get a drum roll to see who the winner is. And it's actually defending his title and winning for the 2nd year in a row. We have Alex from Yelp. So congratulations, Alex. Really awesome. If you check out the rolling document that we have going on, you can see what people have actually said. And just like last year, Alex is full of a bunch of people talking about how awesome he is at taking stuff offline. So congratulations, Alex. And so Brew, what do we have going on with this panel?
Yeah, so this is panel number 17 out of 24, Managing an Online Community Volunteer Program. And Patrick, we'll pass the torch over to you. Take it.
Thanks, Brew. I'm Patrick O'Keefe, and again, this is Managing an Online Community Volunteer Program, the 17th hour of My Community Manager's 24-hour Community Manager Appreciation Day live stream. Volunteer programs are a common responsibility for the community professional, and they have been for a long time. Managing a volunteer team can be one of the most rewarding experiences of your career, but it can also be one of your biggest, most time-consuming challenges. Our panel consists of a group of community management veterans, and between us we have, 80-odd years experience, most of that time spent managing online community volunteers. And before we get started, let's just briefly introduce ourselves, starting with David.
Unmute right now.
Come on, David.
I've got it. I got it under control.
Okay.
So, hey, it's David Dewald. I'm the community manager at Bit9 plus Carbon Black. With a customer community. I also have a coworker who's not with me, unfortunately, who is an internal community manager. So I've got that on my side too.
Hi, I'm Scott Moore. So I've been working with online communities for about 20 years and currently consulting So my work has been with a variety of volunteers. Are we supposed to be jumping into that one, or are we switching?
That'll be the first question, Scott. Yes, sir. And Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Newton. I'm head of Trust and Community at SuperAwesome.tv and the Chief Community Officer at Mind Candy, and also a consultant in the business of community trust and safety. I've been an online community since 1994, where I started at AOL, and I was the program manager for the Community Leaders Program at AOL. And we managed between 5,000 and 16,000 volunteers during my tenure there. And I can be found at RebeccaNewton.com, and my Twitter handle is @RebeccaNewton.
And I'm Patrick O'Keefe. I've been managing online communities since 2000, and I blog at managingcommunities.com. I host the Community Signal podcast. You can find me on Twitter @Patrick O'Keefe. So our first question, I'd like to briefly talk about how each of us has utilized volunteers in our communities, because the first thing people think of is moderation, which is a pretty common and popular example, but there are other ways that volunteers can contribute to a community. So how have you all used volunteers in the communities that you manage?
I know for me, I've used them definitely as moderators. I think that's the go-to, but we've also used them to help organize contests. We've have them help us create, a panel of users to we call it a council, basically, a user council, to help organize and maybe in one case we had them actually list our bugs in a game and come up with a plan of, a hierarchy. This is the worst bug and this is the least worst bug. And it was really good to have them work with the panel and kind of organize that for us so we could take it back to the developer and say, here's the top 10 stuff we need fixed. What can you do about it?
Anybody jump in?
I'll jump in. So, I realize that a lot of my volunteer experience has been with small real-time teams, and so again, it's rule. I call it rule enforcement. It's not just moderating live chats, but it's also handling avatar behaviors, images, and collective action that occurs. So some of that blends into crowd control, and it's like actual crowd control. I also have experience offline, so there's some offline experience in crowd control. Similar to what David said, I've done some volunteers have managed contests, but also have been the mediators between handling prizes for the community who's running games and contests, so they kind of had to manage their own little micro economy, not flooding that prize queue. And a lot of the big list of things: conflict resolution, technical support, welcoming. At Answers, it was probably the largest set of volunteers that I didn't work directly with, but we had 7 different volunteer programs that encompassed about 2,000 total people to 2,500 total people, that ranged everything from setting up activities for community members to participate in, to actually doing just cleanup of a very large and very active wiki.
Very cool.
When I was at AOL, I guess I started as a volunteer, and we did everything in the early to mid-90s. I mean, everything: HTML programming, message board, chat room moderation and managing, teaching and training, graphic design. I mean, everything was done by volunteers early on. And then when I was at Habbo, we had mostly kids and teens, and so when I first joined at Habbo, they had 13-year-olds with banding tools and things. It was a bad plan, so I suggested that might not be a good plan. So we changed the nature of what the Habbo volunteers, that were called Habbos, did, and they mostly did meeting and greeting and sort of acclimating new users into the culture. And then at Moshi, we had mostly parents doing message board moderation, and then we had kid councils, lots of kid councils at Moshi. At Pop Jam, where I am with Super Awesome TV, we don't have official volunteers with tasks and responsibilities, but we do have a system whereby the highly engaged users obtain a certain status and help us induct new users via basically leading by example.
Very cool. So there's a lot of different, ways to use volunteers. I think in my case, mostly moderators, but also we have had, a welcome team where they welcome people to the community. We've had code reviewers. I had an assistant admin at one point, who was a friend of mine. So just a lot of different projects where people can, contribute to the community in some way, maybe not in public, but also offering feedback in private, kind of an advisory team, those sorts of things. So we've had a mix of different volunteers on the communities over the years. When you're dealing with volunteers, one of the most important things to think about is the labor laws, and we're all in the United States, so I think we'll kind of take that perspective. But how do the labor laws and other legal issues impact community volunteer programs? I'd like to talk about that.
So I'll jump in. I think that the first thing, if you have the ability to have access to a legal counsel, talk to your legal counsel and talk to them about how they see labor issues and how they're dealing with things. One of the things is important about talking, if you have access to legal counsel, what they're willing to fight in court over and what they're not willing to fight in court over. That's going to determine a lot of things. Beyond that, yes, without getting into too much details, because I'm not a lawyer, you got to be careful about how to ask people. You're asking for people to be volunteers, and so it's sort of you're asking, you're not setting too much. There's a lot of little fiddly details that I think both Rebecca and David can talk a lot more about how they've avoided things or how they've encountered things. I think in our litigious society, we're starting to see more things like waivers and/or some kind of volunteer contract. And I'll take it back out of the U.S. and global and say, again, if you're setting up waivers and contracts, you might wind up excluding some of your global access. I've had a volunteer program that had, for legal reasons, their lawyers bolted down on needing a contract, and it turned out to be kind of a zero. They were operating at, all the volunteers got converted to zero pay contractors, or you're getting a certain amount of compensation for this. And it instantly excluded everyone that was now international that was coming in to be volunteers for this physical event. So there's questions a lot. It's kind of a hairy thing, and looking at, I think it's just being safe about what you're doing. And then I think there's another issue which, I'd love to hear Rebecca talk about this one, and that is handling volunteers who may be working with people under 18. And with that,
Rebecca, have at it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you're ready. Well, I mean, my advice is I agree with Scott. I would make it happen with the legal counsel, especially in the U.S. I think every state in the U.S. has their own set of regulations about how to work with volunteers. Most of them they haven't really moved into the online world yet, but they could apply those offline regulatory regulations to the online world. I've spent a lot of time working with under 16s and under 18s in the volunteer world, and there are all kinds of laws that you have to follow in the UK and EU. I mean, at HAVO I was in charge of 24 countries, so they each had their own set of laws. But the main thing is as long as you don't have, I mean, this is my experience anyway, as long as you don't have the volunteers, no matter what age, doing a task that a paid person is doing on your staff, then you're okay. And as long as you don't hold them to a strict schedule, I think, just remembering that they're volunteers. Now with kids, you have to get parent permission if they're under 16 in most states and most countries, under 18 in some countries and some states. And so that's my experiences. And also with my experience with working with under 16s is that they're excited for about a week, and then they're just like, they're gone. Every once in a while I would find somebody who would really stick with it, and some of those people I ended up hiring when they were 18, and they've worked with me for the last 10 years, and some have gone on to have other careers. So you can find them, but for the most part, everybody wants a job when they're 11 and 12, and 5 minutes later they want a different job. That's my experience.
I mean, it is a complex issue, so I actually just tweeted out a link that Evan Hamilton shared with me recently. It's a great guide, and it's on the CMAD hashtag, so check that out. You know, Rebecca, you touched on sort of the main thing I always tell people, because it is, you know, it's not a simple issue. There's a number of different factors, but time is such a big thing, right? Since it's not employment, you can't treat it like a job. You can't schedule people. You know, there are no shifts. There are very minimal requirements that you place on someone's time, and then if they choose to, you know, participate and do more than that, it's of their own volition because they enjoy contributing and see value in doing so, and that's really what makes it volunteering.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. When we were doing the volunteer thing, it was a matter of we're not scheduling them and they have no compensation. Because anytime you give them compensation, then you run into what they've done is given you value. And suddenly now there's a value attached to their work. And then they can come after you for more, you know, this was actually a job kind of a thing. So, you know, we tried not to, if it was swag, it was stuff that was just dirt cheap. If it was, you know, or some, in our case, because it was a video game company, it was much easier to give them virtual items, which, you know, in that transaction, they have no value because we have an infinite number of them. And it didn't cost us anything to produce it or get it to them or anything like that. So those things, it was all a matter of there's no schedule, we're not giving them anything, you know, that was compensatory, and you know, just otherwise saying if you want to do this, you're more than welcome to. We did have an 18 age limit, and I did have a community that before I came in was populated by tween males that were doing their own moderation, which was a nightmare in of itself. But you know, as soon as we could, we cleaned out the young moderators. They were just not happy anyway, as you said. But I can tell you that all of that knowledge came from when AOL, and I don't know if you can speak to this, Rebecca, AOL was sued by their moderators. And that's what, you know, got us so worried about what we did with ours.
Rebecca could speak to this, but I don't know if we have the time to really give it the justice. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to talk about the AOL thing, but
okay.
The best way to avoid getting sued is to not take advantage of your volunteers, and we're going to get to that later. So.
Sure. So, you know, labor laws aside, how do you select volunteers? How do you go about identifying people in the community that fit into this volunteer team that you're building?
For me, it was really, you know, it's the people that you know by name without really knowing them, because they do quality posts, they're very helpful in the community, and you get to know them through their actions, right? Sure, you have one set that you know through their actions for negative reasons, but you do usually have a set where you know, oh yeah, Bob is great, or did you see that great post by Bob? And there's that interaction with your existing moderators and other things. I am also one of the risk takers. I will take somebody that comes in and trashes the moderation team and say, fine, if you think we're doing a terrible job, you come in, you be a moderator. And it's risky, but I've found that most of the time they've realized that it is not an easy job and that there is a lot of complexity to it. And they either say, okay, I get it and I'm done, or they become some of the best moderators I've ever had. But that's taking a big leap of faith on somebody, because they could come in and really wreck things for you. But you know, they do want things to be better. They think there's a perceived wrongdoing, but when they get in there and they learn that there's, you know, rules that they have to follow, and that, you know, not everything is black and white, and we deal with a lot of grays, they usually come around and realize that it's not just, you know, an easy job.
There's no doubt that it changes your perspective, I think, when you've seen the other side of the table. You know, when I'm looking at volunteers, I really look for the best of our community. I'm not risky like you, David. I can't do that. I can't take that leap. So I really look for the best of the community, the people who are already following the guidelines, the exemplary members. I consult with my staff, too, because I have built this great team of people, so their opinion carries just so much weight with me as far as identifying people in the community, because I'm not going to see everyone who's a good fit for our team. So I reach out to them, we have a conversation, and really it's about just identifying the person who really speaks to the values of the community as a whole. Anyone else have any thoughts, or should we move on?
I just want to echo, I love it that David takes risks. I'm 100% behind that. working with kids, it's harder for me to do that. But I think it can turn out to be some of the best decisions you'll make for your community. So good for you for doing that.
So what I'll add is kind of break it down a little bit more into the idea of what makes a great candidate for volunteer. And I think that what I look for is are they setting the example of community values? It's not just are they getting it, but are they embodying it? Are they showing it? And by extension, are they teaching others what the community values are? So it's on that really high bar, kind of starting high and then working our way down. I also look for folks who are good at, who are flexible, that they're adaptable, because you never know, especially when they're operating as a proxy for what you're trying to do in a community, they may encounter something that nobody has yet encountered in that particular community. And so it really helps if they have an understanding of being flexible, or if they at least have an understanding of, I got to pass this on, knowing their own limitations. That they also are working with, as they interact with the rest of the community, that they're working with the community, not necessarily working against. So there's a giant list I think any of us could build about what doesn't make a good volunteer, and it's things like finger wagging and authoritarian. But it's folks who are, lifting other people up as they do that. And then the thing that I would add, which I think gets overlooked, we've been talking a lot about observing individuals. I think we can throw in the mix, especially when you're dealing with an extremely large community, data. There are some tricks that you can do in thinking about pulling in interaction data. So you can take a forum, you can take a news group, you can take this sort of stuff, and you can see, how often are they starting threads? How often are they replying to the threads? Do they do a lot of back and forth? Are they diagnosing something? Or are they just shooting off an answer? Are they consistently answering questions that other people are posting, or replying to those? And you can kind of see broader archetypes that might give you a little more insight into what somebody's doing. So it might be, hey, here's a candidate. Great, I'm going to go pull up their data, see how often they're starting conversations, what kind of conversations they're starting, how often are they responding, what kind of conversations they're responding, or how are they responding to those.
Let me ask kind of a follow-up question to everybody. What do you guys do with the people that step up and say, I would like to do it, rather than us looking for them? Someone who says, I would love to be a moderator.
So we have cycles generally of inviting people and reviewing candidates every so often. So usually when someone asks to be a moderator, I don't make them a moderator. And it's just from my own finding is that the people who ask for it generally aren't the people I want. Now there are exceptions to that. There are exceptions to people taking ownership in the community and seeing it that way. But other than that, it's just part of our cycle. So if they're a good candidate or not, it really doesn't matter that they asked. We'll talk about them when that time comes. We review all the candidates, and then we'll invite them. But it really, them asking or not asking, it doesn't necessarily qualify or disqualify them. It just goes back to kind of what they're contributing.
Well, with my current communities, the median age is like 8 years old. So we don't allow that, but we send, everybody wants a job, and everybody writes us all the time saying, "What I'd like to do this, I'd like to be a manager, how did you get the real job, etc." So we have a template that we send them that just says you have to be an adult, things like that. And they're like, "Really?" So that's it for me.
Yeah.
Do they not think you're an adult? I mean, that's a legit question here.
No, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we always laugh about it when we see that. I think because they don't really, no, they see us. I mean, we have photos and stuff like that. So, but I think that they think it's a land of magic, or I don't know. I've been seeing this for like so many years now, with kids really surprised that they have to be a grown-up to get a paid job online. I don't know.
So I want to tell a quick story about at Answers. I don't get to take credit for this, but I'm going to tell the story about Greg Anderton, who is currently, he's essentially the director of community at Answers. And so it was large, so I'm trying to do this really quickly. There were two tiers of volunteers. There were multiple volunteer programs, but in this I'm going to break it down into two. And there were a group called the Supervisors, and they're still there, that had basically a huge amount of wiki admin abilities, permissions. And so there was an issue with onboarding people too quickly and giving them all this ability and not really a lot of training. But we had this other program that was kind of anyone who would ask to be a supervisor was referred to this other program. And what Greg did was he saw the potential for this. And that other program was basically you had a bunch of assignments. It was like there were a number of assignments, go fix these problems, go do a bunch of these sorts of things. What he did was he wound up making that the training program. So anyone who asked to be a supervisor was referred to this program first. And then it was participate in this program, and then the supervisors were then selected from that program. So it's kind of that one, so the supervisors were about 1,000 when I left, and that program had like 1,300 people. It was much bigger, but it was way lower damage that they could do, and then they became the select. So having a proving ground is probably a good way. I'm just offering that as an example.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So we get those people in. We have these great people we're inviting, right? But they don't necessarily know exactly what to do yet. So how do we go about showing them the way? How do we go about training them in their new task?
Well, I'm going to jump in here. So 3 things from my perspective. Now, I ran the 90s training program at AOL, which was called the Community Leaders College, for several years, and we had 250 people a week going through each course, and we had registrars. I mean, it was pretty insane, or it was epic. That's probably a better word. So, from my point of view, a training program or an agenda, a mentoring program, and recognition. So, with a training program or an agenda, a syllabus, real-time and self-paced modules, the whole thing is I think it really makes sense to have somebody set out a whole training program, go through it with people, and go through with people who've never done anything like that kind of work before, and get feedback, and then sort of like a staging, and then roll it out, or a beta test. The number one complaint of volunteers in the U.S., and this has been true for many years. I used to be volunteer administrator way back in the 80s, and same complaint is that they would sign up and they were ready to go, and nobody had anything for them to do, and nobody really gave them a task, and nobody outlined anything, and there were no expectations. There was no induction, no training. So without a measurable task or an expected outcome, you're going to lose the sort of the joy of that person's energy, right? So, and then a mentoring program, I think, is fundamental. Volunteers are usually the outliers in your online community. Maybe not always, but sometimes. And we have this passion and this common interest, and we're like a specialty community and an elite feeling of part of being a volunteer group. And volunteers are communities of doers, right? So if you feel like an outsider, you're not going to contribute. So I think making sure that there's a mentoring program of some sort so people feel like they're part of the group right away. And then the third thing is the recognition of progress and achievement, recognizing the 10% who do the 90% of the work. And it creates a self-sustaining cycle of impact on your community or your product, or however you want to put it. And I'm going to quote Seth Godin here. I just love this. People who care can magnify their impact by building structures that bring in more people who care. So I think that's really important for people to keep in mind, is that you have to recognize them, and the happier they are, they start bringing in smart people, attract smart people, good people attract good people, etc.
Well said.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the mentoring. We always had our new moderators kind of shadow an existing moderator, and say, okay, I'm going to do this one. This is how I'm going to handle it, and do that for a little while until it flipped. And he said, all right, you take the next one and go from there. And that worked out really well. We also were good about having some canned responses pre-made that you could do some slide editing. So if there was a common infraction, then you could just copy paste that in. They didn't have to worry about writing anything new. They just update a few details, and and then I'm good to go on that. And it seemed to work. We of course have people that realize it was a lot more work than you thought, and then that would be it. They'd be out. But for the most part, it was pretty successful that way.
So Rebecca and David had covered everything that I would talk about. The only thing that I could possibly add is I've done simulations, so things that you might encounter as part of orientation and training is just running simulations. So you might have somebody come in and do a conflict mediation and see how they interact or help them interact with a particular situation.
That's a really important thing for you to have said, Scott. I think that's like essential to a good training program. I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah, I really like that. It makes me, no matter what your community is, like you could just, your forum, discussion forum, whatever, you could have like a separate community where you simulate violations. Like, is this okay? Is that no okay? Let them handle it, remove it. What do you do? That's very interesting. I just want to mention handbooks and documentation. So, having a really strong, it doesn't have to be super long, but just describing what the task is, how to go about it, some sort of documentation, some sort of guide for them. I have a moderator guidelines document and what I call a situations guide, which basically says these things happen pretty commonly, and here's how we handle them. So it just sort of takes out 90% of the situations they'll see and tells them exactly how we usually handle them, and they get access to our documentation of past removals and past actions, positive and negative, so they can see like, okay, this happened, that happened. And I encourage people just to kind of watch for a little while before even doing anything at all. Just take a couple weeks even, and just we have a good team. We're not promoting people because we need them 100% now. We're promoting people because they're good for the community. So take your time and really get used to how things work. Now, with that in mind, and you have that team, you train them. I think one of the more challenging aspects, and one of the things that blows up in people's faces online quite often we hear about, is when teams fight and when they don't get along. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you build camaraderie within a volunteer team. For me, it's really two key things. First thing is that I don't let them criticize each other. So, as a volunteer, they're not managing anyone else. They're contributing to the community. And what I want is for them to have a really great relationship with each other. So, in those rare cases where a staff member does something inappropriate and another staff member sees it, I want them to tell me. I want them to come to me, let me know privately, and then I'll handle it if it is, in fact, something wrong. I've often found when I've been on volunteer teams years ago that where relationships broke down is when people started sniping at each other, saying, you didn't handle this right, you didn't take care of that post, you didn't say that the right way. And so having it come from me, which is expected, really helps to kind of maintain the bond between staff members. And the second thing is just to show them everything I deal with. When I'm going through some sort of interesting situation with a member, let's say we have a veteran member who is just, for whatever reason, not contributing as they have in the past. They're maybe, they're being rude, disrespectful, whatever, what have you. And, no one sees that play out because it happens in private. I'm having a private conversation with them trying to bring them back onto the path. But I share those conversations with my staff. They know exactly what I'm doing. They know the decisions I'm making and why I'm making them. So that helps to build camaraderie, not just amongst themselves, but also with me, because they can see exactly what I'm dealing with and can then understand the decision that I'm making, so that there isn't some sort of veil of secrecy, like I'm operating in the shadow and just secretly banning people and taking them away from the community in a sack and throwing them out to the country or something. It doesn't work that way. So I think just being really honest helps a lot.
You don't shadow ban? I mean, everybody knows the community manager's shadow ban.
It's a funny thing. I was just thinking about it the other day. I do, but it's like it's a tool reserved for like 5 people over 15 years, like people who had 15 accounts or 30 accounts. It's never a first step. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, we always have a back channel, right? There's a place where they can go and just talk amongst themselves, and that may be a chat room, that may be a forum, that may be both. But we pull up Skype, open up a room, put all the managers in there, moderators, and they could talk. And you would find that there would be a lot of off-topic stuff, the cat gifts and everything else. But if somebody really got stuck, they would come in there and say, okay, I kind of need help with this. Could somebody else put some eyes on it? And they would work together. But having that back channel, that private space that's just their own, it's appealing to that sense of being elite. I'm a moderator and I've got my own little place where I can do this with other moderators. Helps, build that connective tissue that keeps them together.
people need to vent. Like, they need to commiserate over the things they face.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's funny is I used to keep I had a bunch of emails of people. It was just hate mail basically, and every once in a while I would post that and say, here's the good news of the week, and I would clean it up so you couldn't tell who it was. But some of them were just so absurdly over the top in their remarks that it came off as quite funny, and we call it the mailbag. And this is new in the mailbag, and just fun to talk about. And then they would try and guess who it was, but we would never really tell them. But sometimes you could tell just by the way they worded things. But it was all fun and games.
One time at Habo, we had a parent write and accuse us of being the spawn of Satan. So I know about hate mail. Anyway, for as far as camaraderie with volunteer teams, I guess you've already said sort of the essential things, Patrick, and that is, you have to pay attention to folks. You have to give them a space to vent. You have to sort of do team building. But I'm a little bit competitive by nature, and I think healthy competition is always good. Oops, I'm gonna let somebody else talk with my phone. I can't turn that phone off.
Someone's
Sorry.
competing for your time right now. Scott, is that you? Is that you making that call?
Yeah. Ha ha ha. No, so I'm going to take a slightly different direction. I'll let Rebecca come back to that. So what I do with, I mean, this is team building in a way. And so what I focus on is success of the volunteer program is a group measure, not necessarily an individual measure. And I'm not saying that there's not room for individual competition or recognition. There is. And I think that one of the ways that you can handle that is encourage, similar to what Patrick is saying, public criticism of each other is not the way to go, but public recognition of each other. So building this culture within your volunteer program that come tell me when somebody else has done something really, really cool, and then I will be able to publicly recognize them, and then you can shift that into you publicly recognize when other people are cool. But if you feel like you need to talk about something that's a problem, come to me privately, and we'll take care of it. We'll work on it. We'll see what's going on. But so there's that room for, like, you can vent if you want to, but come to me when you're venting about another person on the volunteer program, so we're not making it a team thing. I think also setting high standards, having that esprit de corps of, hey, we're out for doing this. This is us. This is a team. This is a volunteer program, and the goals of the program are to achieve these things. So we're going to do this together. And some of that might also be back to just teaching people how to give positive feedback. Some folks it's not easy how to give positive, constructive criticism and do that in a way. And so I think doing the one-on-one and having somebody come to you and say, I'm worried about this person didn't do what they were supposed to do, and then you can talk to them about, well, what is that? What's going on? What does that really mean? And you have a little bit of mentorship where you're actually teaching somebody how to rethink how they might actually do that feedback in the future.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. And also, if possible, meeting up in person is always a good thing, because when you get to meet somebody face to face, if you can have volunteer meetups of some sort, even if they're virtual. When you talk to somebody face-to-face, instead of everything being through, like text or whatever, I think, like Skype or whatever anybody uses, Messenger, I think it makes a huge difference. It's like you put a face to that person and you think, oh, maybe they weren't really as rude as I thought they were. I mean, that was an ongoing issue at AOL, and not so much at Habo, because everybody was a little older, or that's not it. I don't know. It was different for some reason. We just didn't have that problem at Habo. But I think, and then I was talking about healthy competition is always good. I think, just creating teams of people to just like you do in the workplace, or at least they do in the UK, everything is about sports and being outside whenever the sun comes out, because it never comes out. So everybody's running to the football fields and having sports days. And I just used to roll my eyes and think, oh my God, sports days, really? But it was such a big team building, task, but it was a great thing. So there's ways to do that virtually as well, I think.
Very cool. Let's talk briefly about how do you keep community volunteers motivated and on task?
So we've talked about this a little bit before. I've specifically said, and it's about having clear goals for your volunteer program, setting those expectations. But it's about having goals that are not necessarily we need to moderate X amount, but it's this higher agenda of why do I have these people? What else can we do with these folks? And so here's an example. If you have the opportunity to put your volunteers in a position where they're making a good first impression, especially to influential people in their industry, that's a powerful goal that can keep people together and focused on, wait, I need to do these things, and this puts me in a position of benefit. Stack Exchange is one example where it's not necessarily a volunteer program, but it's your Stack Exchange number. If you participate in a way that helps other people, you're getting a score. Now that also, and then they've done a lot around that, and I'm not suggesting gamification necessarily. It's a dangerous tool. But Stack Exchange has, if you participate in a certain way, then your participation is easily recognizable. And based on that, people who are hiring jobs can see what is your participation in Stack Exchange. Likewise, that Stack Exchange participation counts heavily towards them hiring community managers, and so you have that shift between that. And you can do this with other things. In the game industry, at Game Developers Conference, there's a volunteer program, and the unwritten agenda of the volunteer program is getting young folks who want to get jobs in the game industry or advance in the game industry into a position where they are helping influential people in the game industry as that first impression, and then that actually supports the entire reputation of the organization. So now people are putting this volunteer experience on their resumes, and the industry, it's been going on for 20 years now, and the industry now recognizes that line. If you say, I was a conference associate at the Game Developers Conference, you actually get a little ahead of the line because the whole unit has been supporting that. And then I think the other thing, I'll pass it on, but the last thing I'd say, and I think Patrick will say more about this, is have the back of your volunteers. So as they're doing the work, support your volunteers. Do not throw them under the bus. If they do something that's a mistake, you can publicly say, look, they were doing a good job, and then you can privately take them back and go, okay, look, do it a different way. I'm going to help train you. I'm going to let's understand what happened here. But don't. If you throw your folks under the bus, you can really sap their motivation for providing you with work in the future.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that you build your reputation by helping others build theirs. So you celebrate their successes, just like you said. When they do something great, you let everybody know they did something great, and that will come back to them. And it's happened with me. I've done something, hadn't thought about it, and suddenly the boss comes by and says, "Hey, you did a great job on that. I heard you did a great job." And I'm like, "Wow, that was kind of cool. I didn't expect that." And so that's the way that I think that helps a lot. As you said, with the GDC, getting them in front of the people that could make a big change in their lives is awesome. So like I said, build your reputation by helping others build theirs, and you'll never have a problem.
Yeah, I'd agree with both what Scott and David said. I think just communication, like remembering to include all the volunteers in the company or organizational communications and letting them know as much as you can about how everything's, there's nothing worse than like finding out something, from somebody in the community rather than through your own inner circle or organization. So I think remembering to keep them in the communication loop, it's just basic respect. You should obviously do the same thing with your paid staff, but I would definitely include the volunteers in any kind of communication about organization. And I think it's really important to give credit where credit's due. I think that's so important. And both Scott and David said that, but I'm just going to reiterate it and say, I would go to Michael Acton Smith, who was the CEO of Mind Candy, and say, hey, this person was amazing, and they had this really great idea. And we didn't try to claim it as a community team idea or something. We would always give credit where credit was due. And he would reach out to those people one-on-one and talk to those kids or parents and bring them in sometimes and things like that. And we'd pick their brains for a day. And I think that really pays off to recognize somebody's enthusiasm and the fact that they're thinking about your team, your product, your community at all, enough to come up with something innovative, whether you implement it or not, I think is important to recognize.
I think what Scott was hinting that I would say is that if someone makes a mistake, to use it as an educational opportunity and not hang them out to dry in public. So when any of my moderators remove something that shouldn't be removed, which happens, once in a while, I'll fix that. I always want 100% perfect, final decision if I can get there. And if it's a public issue that we need to speak about, I always say that, we removed this in error and I apologize for the mistake. It's never that Joe did this or Susie did this or whatever. I don't need to say that they did it. I'm happy to step in front and kind of take that bullet or that train, as it were, and because long term it builds a stronger team and really keeps them motivated and on task. So our final question is, how do you ensure that your volunteer program isn't taking advantage of people?
Well, I'm going to jump in and say project management, relationship, and communication. So under project management, keep the tasks and hours reasonable, and make sure you don't want burnout, because you lose good people that way. You lose everybody that way, especially highly motivated people, which 98% of volunteers are. They're usually pretty driven people. They'll work themselves into burnout pretty quickly due to their passionate nature. So you have to temper that during the training process, during the early days of volunteering, etc. They want to get in there and do it all and drop everything and do it. Make sure that you have enough people for the tasks that your volunteers are covering, and not regularly relying on the most able to carry the load. So, and that's a situation where you don't want 10% of the volunteers to do 90% of the work. That you'd be in big trouble with that. You'd be spending all your time and money on managing 80 to 90% of people who aren't effective. That doesn't even make good business sense. Relationship, checking in with the volunteers regularly, looking at schedules, know the volunteer team. It's really kind of that simple. It's like who you should know, we should know, everybody on the team that we can't, depending on, like, obviously I didn't know 16,000 people at AOL, but you have people who report to you with people who report to them, and et cetera. And those people need to know everybody on that team. They should know them well enough to know if they're feeling overwhelmed or underappreciated. It's all about relationship. Check in with managers on volunteer progress and individual and group progress, and then remind managers that volunteers are not employees. I know we've talked about that already, but it's something sometimes you have to remind people. Don't let them just go crazy and do 60 hours a week, or every waking minute they're in there doing this or that. They can come and go as they please, and they will do so if they're not appreciated. And the last point from my perspective is communication. So I always do these 6-month report cards. I've been doing this for so many years, and they're so effective. And so the number one component of these 6-month report cards is that they're very simple. I ask 3 questions, and they're confidential, and they know that they're confidential. And I tell them that, and I mean it. I'm not going to say so-and-so said, you stunk as a manager or something like that. I'm not going to do that. But it's the only way to get the sort of nitty-gritty of what's really happening in a program, right? So every 6 months I send out something, and it says 6-month report card. The first question I ask is, what do you love about your position or the community? I mean, you can determine what that what that noun is going to be. What's working well? The second question is, what do you not care for? What's not working well? The third question is, any kudos for anybody? which goes back to recognition. And that has proven to be a really useful tool for me for almost 20 years now. And I'm pretty religious about sending that out, and it really gives you a good opportunity, because it's hard to be one-on-one with everybody, but you should follow up one-on-one if somebody's really unhappy, or if somebody notices something that's pretty amazing that you didn't even know. You should say, hey, this is really great that you told me that, et cetera, et cetera. And then send communiques to the volunteer team regularly. And I would even say maybe, I mean, it depends on your community or your product or whatever, but once a month is not too often to send a special communique to the volunteer team about what's going on, and only publicly recognize somebody when you believe it's really deserved. Don't just fill up the volunteer of the month with fluff, or something like that. It's like filling up a recognition field with just something to shove in there because, well, we got to have a volunteer of the month, so give me somebody, so-and-so got a new dog or something, you just really want to seek out and recognize people for their talents and time and contributions when it's really well deserved, and then everybody will feel like it's the real thing and not just you're getting the parking space for a month.
Great answer. I mean, it's always ensuring that the people who are volunteering really want to be there. Great volunteer programs are mutually beneficial. People are contributing to something that adds value to their life. And with that, I think we'll draw this panel to a close. Scott, you had a resource you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I've got two homework assignments for everyone. One, in Patrick's book, Managing Online Forums, he talks about volunteers. And then two is, this is good. It's aimed for nonprofits, and it's aimed at virtual volunteering for nonprofits, but it's got a huge amount of information if you're thinking, I have no idea where to start. This is kind of it. It's called The Last of Virtual Volunteering Guidebook by Jane Cravens and Susan Ellis. Jane is spelled Jayne Cravens. Google her name and volunteering. She's been doing this for a long time for a whole lot of people, for the UN, and organizing both online volunteers, but also online organization of offline volunteering. So, and it covers everything that we've been talking about, for including some of the legal stuff and what to watch out for.
Very cool. Well, thanks everyone. For David DeWald, Rebecca Newton, Scott Moore, I'm Patrick O'Keefe. Thank you for watching. Next up is my buddy Blaze Grimes-Vior, who's talking about succeeding in social media for regulated industries. So stay tuned. And with that said, let's take it back to the studio. Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was absolutely fantastic. We were joking around earlier, and I was saying about how just the depth of knowledge that you guys have. Thank you so much for sharing all of it. If you guys have any other questions, make sure to connect with these wonderful folks on Twitter. And yeah, make sure you tune in to the next panel. We will be giving away our last award. And another shout out actually to Rebecca, since she actually won the Community Manager Choice Award last year. So that torch will be passed on next hour, and we look forward to seeing you then. See you later, guys.